Hello, everybody. We're really happy to be talking about healthy buildings today. I'm Vicki Warden. I'm the president and CEO of the Green Building Initiative, and we administer the Green Globe's building certification program.
Hello, I'm Greg Streif. I'm the founder and CEO of the ESG Transition Company, where we connect end users that are seeking ESG solutions with the providers of those solutions. We help navigate along the way and act as an intermediary.
Hi everyone, it's Anna Malhari, CEO of Verus Residential. We're a vertically integrated, publicly listed REIT focusing on multifamily in the Northeast.
Jeff Hemler, co-founder, CEO, Logical Buildings. We hope owners and operators actually reduce their energy and carbon and make their buildings more healthy and sustainable.
Hi, my name is Sydney Mainster. I'm the VP of Sustainability and Design Management for the Durst organization. Durst is a 100-year-old family-run company based in Manhattan. We're on our 4th and 5th generation of family members. We develop commercial and residential buildings that we own and operate.
Good morning, everyone. I'm John Amatruda. I'm a principal for sustainability at Socotec Inc. We are a specialty consulting firm that works in a number of niche areas, including energy and sustainability, building envelope consulting, code advisory, project advisory, and things of that nature. And been fortunate to have been working on sustainability projects, particularly here in the New York area for over 20 years.
Great. That was impressive, everybody's backgrounds and what we're bringing to the table today. So we just had a great panel that talked a lot about ESG, and I thought we would start out with talking about all of the net zero commitments and with what we've all been through with COVID, what are some of the data sets that building owners and lessees are tracking today for our panel?
So building owners are beginning to track sort of all the above, right? Everything from heating, cooling, to the lighting, the ambient light, to worker wellness as well. What we're finding is that energy efficiency, better lighting, all these things. This is very, very important stuff to track and really feeds into kind of the ESG and sustainability narrative in a big way. And that's the information that you really need to sort of be able to make actionable results.
So I think the short answer is measure everything you can and get all the data you can across the ESG spectrum. We've all become pretty good at measuring the environmental side. We can all imagine how to measure emissions, energy, and how that works towards our targets. I think when it gets a lot more trickier is when we talk about the S, and we'll be talking about healthy buildings today. How do you measure that? Is that certifications? Is that your residents' or tenants' engagement, or is that something else? And we've been spending a lot of time on humanizing ESG and finding points through which we can connect with our residents and communities to deliver all those objectives that are not as easily measurable as some of the emission goals.
Yeah, here at Logical Buildings, we help our owners and our operators capture Scope 1 data from their meters, their utility meters. Their Scope 2, which is what they're consuming and purchasing and carbon offsetting. And Scope 3, the built spaces they own that they can't control, like resident direct meter spaces or commercial tenant direct meter spaces. We help collect that data and make it actionable to achieve reductions.
On the building owner side, we get a lot of requests from our commercial tenants around utility consumption, as mentioned. So we have an energy management platform. We get every 15-minute data intervals. We've been trending that data. It's been interesting to kind of trend that data from, frankly, March 2020 to now. And I'd say that's probably the primary request that we've been getting from the commercial side.
I'm going to perhaps answer this a little bit differently as a consultant, but we work for owners who are oftentimes trying to get building certifications related to their ESG platforms. And I would say some of the more interesting things that we are seeing develop in terms of requests and trying to have the ability to understand where there may be initiatives to follow that are perhaps new to the market, or things related to not just the local laws, which I know you were just talking about, but starting to see a lot more interest in embodied carbon and in how that may influence decisions about either renovating buildings or looking at, how to evaluate the building systems for new projects. And on the healthy side, I think we're seeing a lot of requests about understanding how can we use this body of material transparency data that has been growing over the last several years, that has been promulgated by rating systems like LEED and WELL, but that people are wondering how can we best use that to actually make decisions to improve the health of our buildings.
Good comments, John. And we'll stay down there with you for a minute. If you want to kind of talk a little bit more about the S piece of ESG, the social piece and the healthy buildings piece, and what are you seeing in terms of more real-world examples? So we'll just go down the line with what people are implementing and what creative solutions they're coming up with in the S category.
Yeah, so I think there's a again, from our experience, what we're seeing is that that people are bringing health and sustainability together as a kind of combined set of goals that are addressing their ESG plans simultaneously. So again, with the certifications, we've started to see a lot of buildings now that are pursuing both a sustainability certification like LEED, with in addition to something like WELL or FitWell as an actual target for what they want to be able to tell their clientele that about what they've built. And I think what we're also seeing is that there's a lot of sort of a desire to understand more holistically, what does it mean to talk about a healthy building? What should we be determining in terms of things like, basic systems like ventilation and filtration. With COVID, of course, there was a lot of issues related to also other types of UV treatments and things of that nature. The material issues, like I was starting to mention earlier, what do we bring into the building and how do we make improvements to those? And also, I would say we're starting to see more of our projects really also address some of the basic design related issues, ranging from just things we all know about like daylighting to biophilia and issues like that. So we are starting to see that actual projects that we're working on are really trying to become more integrated so they can really make a more definitive statement about how they've created some value for their clients.
I think it's an interesting, to build on what John was saying, it's an interesting time, especially around health and wellness, and there was a lot of, obviously with COVID, it just brought it to the forefront, the tie between the indoor environment and the health of occupants. I think what I'm seeing and what I've been fortunate enough to be part of a lot with John, partnering with John, is since about 2014, we've been pushing really hard to optimize the indoor environments that we're delivering at our buildings. It's been primarily at our residential properties, but we've been pushing for transparency of the building products we install in the indoor environment. We've actually been defining our own IAQ testing metrics, trying to really build off of starting with a LEED baseline, but building off of and reducing the numbers and the thresholds that our indoor environments can hit based on actually how we've been performing. And I think we just opened our newest residential building in Long Island City, 950 units, and we use this really robust indoor air quality testing methodology. And for the first time, we really delivered what I can be considered to be really awesome neutral indoor environments, and I credit it with the progress made around being able to better select healthy building products. I credit it with being able to better control the construction methodology with better on-site oversight, and I think it's really exciting that we're at that point where we can really understand and make good, healthy selections and be able to measure the impact of those selections on the indoor environment.
Yeah. we're going to tell what we're doing with Veris in particular. You know, the S of ESG, socially engaging residents. Now this data, this 15-minute data is accessible. It's not just accessible to the common area, but it's all accessible to the residents. And we're enabling owners like Veris, we have folks from Avalon Bay here, that they could now provide their residents really cool apps that provide that same 15-minute data in real time and have, you know, guidance on what to do when, time of use, and bring down that energy, bring that down the emissions footprint in those areas that before there was no accessibility, you couldn't see it. And now it's with engagement. We had buildings this last week in New York City during the heat wave having ice cream parties in the common areas, engaging the residents to come out of their apartments, turn things down, turn up your set points, bring the entire building down as a community. And we had climate community ambassadors there in the lobby tabling, helping them, you know, dishing out ice cream, but also, you know, explaining what the impact they're having on the environment, all because of the data that's now available.
You know, I agree with everything that's been said. Indoor air quality, the environment, super important as far as equipping residents with in-unit technology to create impact. But we're trying to go beyond that on the S side and really link the health and the environmental aspect together in innovative amenities like what we call Veris Farm. There's quite a few of them in Brooklyn too, which is basically turning a dead retail space into a room that now has 20 hydroponics planters in there, kind of 5 feet tall, that produce fresh vegetables for our residents on a weekly basis. We harvest weekly, our residents get fresh lettuce or herbs or whatever's on offer, and it gives them not just a chance to eat better, straight produce that is being literally developed inside, but also to meet with their neighbors, engage with the communities, and it just links everything together for us.
So we're seeing a lot of lessees and building owners of older buildings really seeking out solutions where they can breathe new life into existing buildings through small changes. We represent a bunch of ESG solution providers, but just a couple, you know, from window skins to other types of non-invasive, low-cost options that can really improve the air quality, reduce the amount of emissions that are used, and improve the lighting as well. And these things really matter when you walk into a building and you can feel that, you know, you can feel that that's what's going on, right? And there's sort of a vibe associated with it. And what we're also seeing is more EHS and HR professionals having direct buy-in into these decisions and really pushing better lighting for workers and increasing the access to ambient light and that sort of thing, which I think is really fascinating. And you know, we've even heard of entire offices, you know, entire teams of people going into new office spaces, and everybody needs to sign off on the new space prior to the office moving in there. And I think it's a great way that we're addressing the office crisis. So.
That's great. So there's a lot under S. We heard about community food development, hydroponics, and other types of measures in residential environments. So we also heard about monitoring of indoor environment, and I thought maybe we just take a minute and drill down into the prop tech a little bit more, into the technology, and maybe either Sydney or Jeff, you might comment a little bit more about any sort of indoor environmental monitoring that you think is going to be more predominant, and any other kind of property tech people might want to be thinking about investing in.
Sure. I mean, you know, when it comes to indoor, you know, air quality, other types of sensors, the cost of these devices have like just plummeted. With low cost, high impact, real-time information about your environment, really easy stuff. But show of hands, how many people here have an electric vehicle, electric car? We got one person, two, not a whole, three. Thank you. Did you park below? Because if you park below, there's no charger. When I brought my car over, I said, hey, where do you charge the car? And they're like, no, the charge is $12. I said, no, not the fee to park my car. I said, would you have a charging station? And they're like, no. I'm like, really? This is a brand new building. This is what we have to do in design. We have to change that. And there's innovators out there, sitting next to one, we're part of EV100 or pushing at like various residential where they're pushing for EV charging. to provide an amenity for the residents or for commercial tenants in a space like this. But these are the little things that are being overlooked in design that need to be addressed as mobility becomes electrified. Same thing's happening for heat and cooling. That's electrified. State of New York, Local 97 New York City, pushing for electrification, just not on mobility, but also on heat and cooling, obviously. And having controls, enterprise cloud controls over your consumption of thermostats as another low-hanging fruit type of thing to do in technology indoors is going to drive that change and that delta of reduction. And that's like really key, really low-hanging.
Right. So planning buildings so that we're cutting down on smog,
Sure.
leading to healthier breathing.
Absolutely.
I think on prop tech, that's the main takeaway. This is often the low-hanging fruit. We've heard a lot today about the size of the investments and need for financing to fund a lot of these progresses. But these are relatively cost-effective measures, often with incentives available on top of them, with payback periods between a year or 2 years, maybe even shorter, depending on what the measure is. So I think prop tech and investing into sensors and other technology is a great entry point for building owners to start moving towards a decarbonization path while making their buildings healthier for their occupants.
So I wanted to tackle the question about monitors and measuring. Whenever someone asks me this question, I say that the meter or whatever you're measuring needs to be accurate and it needs to be actionable. If you don't have those two items as a core component of whatever data you're looking at, it's useless. So I think the challenge right now with a lot of people in the market is kind of weeding through the BS, to be honest. There's a lot of, especially IAQ sensors, data sensors that are being pushed out there, and they're definitely getting a lot cheaper. They're more prolific. But if they're measuring, what they're measuring is not good or not accurate, or if you have to recalibrate them and people don't know that you need to recalibrate them, what you're ending up is people that are looking at data that may potentially be alarmist and untrue. So what we spend a lot of time doing is making sure that whatever measurements, whatever data we're tracking, it better be accurate. And there's a lot of attention you need to pay with just verifying the meter is reading correctly, verifying that you know how often you're going to have to recalibrate that IAQ sensor, because it's not going to stay accurate for forever. You're going to have to go and measure and make sure it's still reading correctly. We just went through a 1.5-year pilot of testing it against our own IAQ sensor at One Bryant Park, LEED Platinum building. It's a lab quality IAQ, insane air quality system, and we were able to weed out quite a few air quality sensors because they just weren't meeting the accuracy of what we knew was already true. But it's great that we're at a point that now, once you go through that, you can start offer good, accurate, actionable data, as long as you also then provide people with, well, what action can they take if they see data that is concerning or data that they want to affect, whether it's air quality, whether it's energy, whether it's any kind of utility consumption. It's an interesting time to be measuring stuff, but you got to know what you want to do with that data.
So what you're referring to as well is training is important both on for your employees, your property managers, but also your tenants and residents, so they know what tools you're actually giving them, and just integrating all of this throughout the company, as was mentioned before. I think that's a crucial piece. I agree that just having sensors for the sake of it is not going to get you there. You need to be able to act on that information and evaluate it constantly and move forward from there.
I think prop tech is really, we view it as kind of the link between the soft and hard upgrades for a lot of the buildings. I think, the other thing that's not getting tracked, and I think that as we move more and more towards a system where we're tracking all these sort of data points, really that all ultimately feed into, worker wellness, right? And the integrated bottom line, which I think is such a cool concept. And, I think that we need to do more tracking around how the folks in the office are responding to these changes too. And what we're seeing, how the increase in the bottom line, lease rates and tenant rates, I think the other thing I just want to mention is somebody mentioned that there's a lot of options out there, right? And I think one thing that we do, and I don't mean to do a shameless plug here, but at the ESG Transition Company, we provide, we go through the ESG solution providers that we represent, and we do an assessment, and we understand where they sit in the narrative and in the journey, and we help people kind of navigate the options. And so I think that was a really good point that was made, is there's a ton of options out there, and you really need to make sure that you're choosing the right one that gets you to where you want to be on your ESG journey.
John, did you have any comment on prop tech?
I think my take on technology would be, again, a little bit different in saying, technology is not just something you put in a building. Technology also encompasses tools that designers can use to design buildings. And again, from my perspective, I think there's been a lot of interesting development of tools over the last few years that are related to both, again, building or material ingredient information, the transparency information we're talking about, also life cycle assessment tools. And I think, both of those are things that are slowly but surely transforming the way designers work and how they make decisions, key decisions that are discussed with owners to impact both sustainability and healthy building decisions. And I think that's, if you're from a design firm and you have not started to work with these tools, I think it's something you really want to investigate, because I think it's definitely going to become a more integrated part of practice as time goes on.
Great comment. So BIM and life cycle assessment monitoring, as well as indoor environmental monitoring. So let's talk a little bit about the legislative side of things and the policy side of things. We're seeing a little bit more of focus on, as an example, affordable housing and the words, creating healthy environments in some policy goals, let's just call them, not necessarily regulation yet. What do anybody have a crystal ball on what you think legislatively may be driving more focus on healthy buildings?
Yeah, I mean, certainly when it comes to load control, you go in New York City and, it's an old PTAC mark. You know what a PTAC is? Package Terminal AC Unit, also has heat, not really efficient, a lot of different providers in the local area. And you might rent a 2-bedroom and you have 3 PTACs. And none of them, you can't control them. You have to run around to play with the dials, right? So now there's technology to literally transform those PTACs to be communicating, that you can control it from your mobile device. And then on top of that, I mean, how many people here are in the Con Ed territory? Is Con Ed your utility? Well, guess what? Con Ed now enables you to see your data down to 15 minutes. How about that? That's out there. So now there's an ability for end users. There's 4 million meters in Con Ed. Over the past 5 years, you've been paying for it. You might not know it, but in your piece of your bill, you've been, paying for these meters to be put in. They have a green sticker on it. It's a real Con Ed meter. It doesn't get more measurable and verifiable than that. That's perfect data. Now, you have that. Now, put that together with your control over your HVAC. Now we're in business. Now we have measurable and verifiable data, and now you have the ability to control it and lower it. And that's really, really important in this type of panel that people should know is out there right now.
I think there's a ton of local laws which we could go through, but I know that probably everyone here is familiar with them. And I think probably a lot of the other panelists have spoken about them before now. But, like Local Law 88, I think is awesome, right? Everybody that has at least 25,000 square feet and up has to upgrade their lighting system. LED lighting, the benefits are just so vast, right? They're recyclable. There's a resource management play there, right? Where the materials that are used are actually more sustainable than incandescents. Promotes worker wellness, right? There's so much math and research around the benefits of tapping into the right circadian rhythm if you sort of hit the right lighting. And I think all these things just speak for themselves, and people want more of them, more of it. And the local laws are maybe perhaps just the nudge that we need to move closer to actually implementing these things. The other thing around LMI, right? Low and middle income families and end users. There's tons of incentives within the community solar space in different markets where there's actually added incentives to provide access to renewable power to folks in that, that sort of demographic, if you will, for lack of a better word. And there's lots of areas that you can look that, that I think kind of speak to that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Just to pick up on one other piece of the existing buildings front, do you want to comment a little bit about retrofits and what
Oh,
people
yeah.
are prioritizing on retrofits?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think we have space at Rockefeller Center, and when I not right where we are, but when I walk to the bathroom around the corridor, there's an HVAC system that's not quite as loud as this one, but it's very loud and it pushes a lot of air out of it, and you can feel it coming out. And there's just such minimal little kind of non-invasive upgrades you can do. One of our providers, AeroSeal, right, has a special, and there's others that do this, but sealant that they shoot into the duct, and then it retains the air. You have better air quality. You sort of retain more heat and cooling in the building. Same with window skins. We work with Wex Energy, right? Those are a really non-invasive, low-cost way to upgrade your sort of the retention of energy inside of your building by just literally putting a skin on the window. Lighting retrofits can really play a big part too. We work with quite a number of lighting retrofit providers that specialize in these types of things. But yeah, I mean, I could keep going, but those are sort of the main ones. Yeah.
There's a real connection between health and wellness and lighting, so that makes
Absolutely.
good sense.
Yeah.
Anyone else want to comment on retrofits and prioritization?
So I think on retrofits, there are a lot of the low-hanging fruit options already today to move the buildings further. But to your earlier point on policy and kind of where we're heading, we spent a lot of time today talking about policy, and I think it's important that we all recognize that while the policy changes drive a lot of people in the industry and other industries to make a change, that's not the fundamental reason why we're doing a lot of these things. So climate change is real. People want to live in healthy environments. There's a lot of research out there. Their residents and tenants prefer healthy and sustainable environments. So it's good for business, but it's also good for the planet. So I think we should just step back a bit and all recognize while we're doing all of this, and that it's not just to prevent fines or meet certain regulatory requirements.
I would say, there's definitely the conventional type of things one can do. We discussed like HVAC controls, lighting, but we're seeing some really cool stuff happening in the market right now with battery storage. It's actually happening. There's a building, Avalon Bay in White Plains, New York, has a battery storage system that is completely AI. I mean, every day it's peak shaving, predicting when the peaks happen. It's taking low-cost carbon power at nighttime, discharging daytime. It's there as a resource during demand response events that we had last week during the heat wave, actually generating cash value for the battery as well. So you have cost reduction, you have revenue generation, you have decarbonization, and it's all automated. It's like nirvana for like solving Local 97. So we anticipate seeing a lot more of that in the market. There's a lot of incentive driving towards battery storage, linked up with EV charging, linked up with solar where it's available to have like a really nice deliverable, integrated system to deliver these decarbonized types of values.
I think I want to revisit the question of the regulatory and the policy piece. I think especially, I talk about healthy building products all day, but I think that in particular around chemicals, we have a serious lack of regulatory efforts and legislation in place. There are over 100,000 chemicals in use today in our building products, in our global supply chains, and here in the US, only 200 have ever been tested for safety, and only 9 have restrictions on use. And it means that none of this stuff that is getting into the stuff we build with, construct with, and end up putting in our indoor environment has been proven safe. It's up to me as an owner, you as an architect, someone who's procuring this, you all as people that are buying this stuff, to actually figure out if what you're purchasing and the ingredients on what you're purchasing is safe and not harmful for you. We're making some headway at the state level. New York State is looking at PFAS very seriously. There's some regulatory stuff beginning around flame retardants, and there's been a lot of advancement on the consumer side and on the push for manufacturers to have better disclosure of this data. And we have better data around these chemicals of concern, but we're way, way far behind, let's say, Europe or other areas globally that are really trying to ban chemicals of concern or regulate substances of concern. So it's an interesting time where we've gotten a lot further in consumers really pushing this and having better disclosed data, but we're way behind on the regulatory environment.
Very good comment. It strikes me that so much of what we do to make buildings healthier costs money, takes a lot of analysis, takes a lot of people involved in the process, and the prior panel sort of addressed how do we do all this for Class B and Class C, and I wondered if anyone has experience applying healthy building strategies across Class B, Class C, and beyond.
Well, I don't want to suck up all the oxygen, but we do a lot of work in affordables, water consumption monitoring, water efficiency, leak detection, really big high demand, especially in affordables where there's not a rub, owners paying for that. A lot of master metered buildings in affordables. So, the electric and gas, a lot of times electric is being paid by owners as well. So, providing solutions in those Class B, Class C, how to bring down those loads. Again, many of the things we already described in terms of HVAC control as a big one, but really there in a master meter building, it's about resident engagement, being able to get them involved, knowing what they're doing is affecting their environment, it's affecting their, the cost to run the place. Being able to articulate that and being able to provide them incentives that now exist, because you do have a lot of payments coming from Con Ed or the wholesale grid to bring down power, and being able to allocate that. Tishman Spire, Jackson Park is an example where the past year, where they're able, the master meter community, like 1,200 units, Mungo, where they're able to share that allocation of that demand response payments to the residents. It's master metered. And sometimes we're able to do it a little more empirically using sub-meter data from companies like SATEC. Or sometimes it's a matter of allocation. They know it's the residents really, their brute force that brought down that master meter data and costs, and they got those payments. But so the residents, so that's that resident engagement, and then it becomes community effort and articulating that way. And we're seeing that in the market.
Yeah, it seems like another logical answer is just that engagement, occupants and residents on things like water intrusion and leak detection and anything that is controllable that can really impact health issues is critical. John?
I was going to say, I think there are also, there may be a misinformation about the fact that if you're trying to do a healthy building, that everything's got to be more expensive. There's a program, for instance, that the Healthy Building Network has online called Home Free, and they have other related resources as well that are where they've already done a lot of research looking at basic materials that go into buildings that have health-related impacts, typically finishes, and they've made recommendations about how to select products that have the lowest impacts. And these are very affordable products. It's not like you're having to go out of your way to find something that's some sort of real specialty item that you have to special order. I think the other piece of that is that there's kind of an integrated way to think about healthy buildings, right? So there's the load impact, which has to do with what materials you put in. So you're trying to start off by using healthier products to begin with. Then you're looking at things like ventilation, basic ventilation systems. You're looking at how do you clean and maintain the space. You're looking at things like daylight and lighting quality. There are many things that can be done in those areas that any building or Class B or Class C building could implement with the basic technologies we use today. I think part of the issue is trying to maybe assemble that somewhat holistic package of strategies that says, I'm hitting all the major items, I'm hitting all the major targets. I may not have been able to go quite as far as maybe a Class A building, but I'm able to do the best with what I've got, and I think that's a real implementable strategy.
That's great. Thank you for that. So let's, before we open it up for questions, let's just take a minute and give everybody your 30 seconds to a minute or so idea of what the next 5 years of planning, what does the future mean for healthy buildings? What should everybody be planning into their next designs and build outs and retrofits?
So I think, and not that I think it's happening. I mean, ESG is very much part of a broader ecosystem, and I think people are continuing to catch on and really seeing the benefits in sort of a holistic sense, where techno-economic solutions lead to very real impacts on your workforce and your tenants, and I think that that's really exciting, right? People are really starting to believe and see the power of stacking technologies. And that's part of the reason that we started our company, is because we want to come and bring people a suite of options as opposed to a single solution. When you start talking about double, triple, quadruple play scenarios, it starts to become economically far more rewarding, but also a lot more interesting to a tenant, perhaps.
So I think healthy buildings are becoming more and more of a standard over the next few years. Residents, tenants will expect it. And I think we'll see a lot more technology going into the spaces, but also a lot more standardization around what are the certifications to look for. A lot of education among the stakeholders, what they expect, and then the landlords reacting to that.
Yes, I mean, one thing that has been spoken about is connectivity. So in the next 5 years, I mean, infrastructure of construction and design, making sure connectivity, wireless control, or even wired control, what is that connectivity is really key to integrate all these new types of dispatchable loads to make the buildings more decarbonized.
I'd say for us for the next 5 years around design decision and making decisions that are healthy and sustainable, certainly better tools to assess embodied carbon of selecting how the building design, better, faster tools, more accurate tools. I would say continuing to really drive and push the market for additional healthy options. Oftentimes, we've seen a lot of progress where we might have one really great insulation material, but we want 3 or 4 insulation products by different manufacturers that also meet the same criteria. I would say, and then finally, which we started to touch on with the social piece, it's educating the tenant and residents and making sure we're engaging with them about these topics, helping them to make good decisions when they're in their space, how they're living and working in their space, and making sure that we educate and inform and give them tools to, again, to take action without necessarily scaring them or making them overly alarmist around some of the data or some of the metrics that I talked about today.
I think I'd start by building a little bit off of what Cindy just said on the material side. I think we're going to start to see more offerings from manufacturers where they are picking up on the information that they've already been providing and coming up with things. We're already starting to see the first examples of things like, for instance, carbon neutral products that manufacturers have developed, and I think you're going to see something similar with healthy building products over time. You're going to see more certifications and more emphasis by manufacturers on the fact that they have optimized certain factors in their products to make them healthier. The other piece that I would say I think that we expect to see is we've also started to see a few different companies now that are working on interesting retrofit systems for HVAC to allow a higher degree of controllability of the systems, particularly in buildings, existing buildings where you're having to deal with existing HVAC layouts, and the kind of controllability that we've been talking about here as well, that users will have ability through their terminals or through their phones to make these kinds of adjustments. So I think those are the kinds of things that I expect to see become more commonplace within the next 5-year time frame.
So I think we're optimistic, right, about a lot of more healthy buildings. So I think, Chris, if you're ready to help us out with questions, we're ready to take any questions. There's Chris. Anyone have questions for any of these experts here?
Raise your hand and I will bring a mic around. Here we go.
Thank you. I want to ask about the integration of concepts of zero waste in the operation of your buildings, reduction of single-use plastics, better diversion of organics, more recycling overall. Can you touch on that? Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. Certainly at our residential buildings where DSNY is providing the organics collection service, we've enrolled our residential properties. So we have metal, glass, plastic, and organics as a core component. We're actually really careful to make sure that when we're getting sort of data back, we're not getting BS data again about the real metrics around organics collection. So we actually have, we actually make sure we weigh all the bags before they leave our residential buildings, and we write down the weights on ourselves, and we check that it goes in the right truck. We do that at all of our commercial properties as well. We have, we offer organics collection throughout our commercial portfolio, and that's a private hauler that we use for those properties. And we trend the data. We look at the data, and literally 2 weeks before everything shut down in March 2020, we were about to have this great competition and this launch at Trade Center. We were all geared to go, and of course it got pushed. It's been a little more quiet with our rollout of organics, and we're hoping to really bring back some tenant and resident engagement around really making sure those numbers are increased. We're also doing a lot of, we're starting to reintroduce waste auditing into our operations so that we rip the bags apart and really understand what our diversion rate looks like and see where we can better affect that. I can talk trash a lot, so I am happy to talk more with you after this.
Probably have time for one more quick one in the back. Perfect.
So how are you guys addressing this payback issue with a lot of the property owners and managers? You know, a lot of companies have traditionally run with I'm not doing solutions with a payback of longer than X. But you guys talked about, you know, all these societal benefits and being healthy in your building. So how are you pushing property owners to move past some of those traditional metrics that they've used to really get to the goals that we have here in society for carbon neutrality?
So I don't actually think depending on your investment horizon, but a lot of the payback periods are actually relatively short. And I think it is about proving that case to the decision makers that this isn't a compromise, that actually very quickly you're still saving money, and even if you wouldn't care about the environmental or social benefits, it's good for business. A lot of on the prop tech side, we spoke about is 12 months paybacks, maybe 24. You see the results very quickly. I think it's what it's important to have the tools to measure that it's actually real. That it's not just at the initial stage, someone tells you, oh, this will pay back in 12 months, but you are able to prove it out, create a track record, and build on that. Jeff, you probably would have stuff to add.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really super crucial to have, you know, clean utility data from the utility provider, because that's the mother of all cash registers of what an owner pays. So you use that as your baseline, and then you are able then to measure and verify as you insert technologies that have a cost. What is it reducing in terms of cost to serve that building now? Across the board, the tariff, the supply, right? And then also, are there ways to generate revenue? In other words, there's grid services that you can now provide, making your building more dispatchable to reduce carbon, that when it's time to use carbon, which we now know, you could offer back to utility or the greater wholesale market. Those factors go into monetizing those investments that give you a true ROI.
I would just also add the avoided costs, right? With Local Law 97 and other things that are coming to fruition, right? What we do is we try to create a narrative around the holistic solution. Here's how much this will reduce. Here's how stack this on top of that, then this. Then you start to see sort of in its entirety, like how powerful these things can be and how well they all interact with each other. Like none of these things should stand on their own and act in isolation, then you do nothing else, right? And so I think going through that narrative and educating people in how these things work, how they interact, and what the benefits are is a big part of it too, and the avoided costs of emissions.
I love Greg's comment. I just wanted to add to that there's so much interest by lessees, theoretically, in these types of benefits that green leases are really coming into play in terms of creating payback options for owners to actually put forth these initiatives and get the payback from them. So all around, there's a lot of drivers.
Terrific. Let's get a big round of applause for our third panel.